Speaking of clearing the deck and starting over, it was, as I said, 25 years ago that the world was on the verge of collapse, according to the Y2K prognosticators. Computers were going to shut down, governments were going to close, money was going to be unavailable. I don't know what else. Planes were going to drop from the sky. It was just going to be a calamity. And I don't think that was the real reason that you did this, Paul, was it? You did something that I think just the greatest story for the 25th anniversary. And let's talk about that if we can.
Yeah, sure. No, it was really not. We had back then, let's see, I'm trying to remember if we were still under the J-Core moniker or the Clear Channel moniker there in Cincinnati, but I was the director of engineering for the Cincinnati radio group, which was 8 radio stations at the time. And one of those, of course, was WLW. And I had very good fortune to be able to live next to the transmitter site in the house, which is no longer there. And basically headed up the department. And of course, we had done all our due diligence and we'd done all our patches. And I had a guy downtown, several guys watching the automation system and making sure that everything was going to roll over properly. And we were pretty confident that it was. And so me being the boss, decided that, well, I'll stay up at WLW since they're a PEP station and a key player and things. And I'll be up here and make sure that everything here goes okay. So if you really want to know my thought process, that was it. I was just being lazy. And so I'm bored. I go around about 10 o'clock and I tell my wife, so I'm going to go next door. So if you need something, I'll want. So I'm going to go mess around. So I went over and, sent out I don't know if it was an email or back then, I think we actually had UHF 2-ways. And I said, yeah, this is Paul. I'm here. If you need anything, holler. And so I'm over there and I'm, sitting there at the console, the old control console, being kind of bored. I couldn't, I can't imagine. I never pulled a transmitter duty shift, so I cannot imagine having to do that. So anyhow, I'm sitting there and I said, well, I wonder if the old Western will fire up. And the Western Electric was a 1928 model, highly modified. And it was I think the audio section was maybe a 6SM7 driving some 807s, driving probably some 4CW 25,000s, which, if you don't know, is the same as a 4CX 15,000 electrically. It's just water cooled. So I had a pair of them as a modulator section, and then it had the RF chain was some stuff down the line, a couple of old water cooled triodes, 4-400 drive and all that. So it's sitting there. So I brought it up and well, it wouldn't come up. Let's put it that way. And so I dig around and I find that the output tube of the oscillator, which I think might have been an 807, and I pushed it back into spares and grab another 807 because everybody's got spares on the shelf, right? And slapped it in and fired it up, and so the transmitter came up on the air, and I thought, what the heck? I'll see if I can put it on the air. Now we were running a DX50, and I'd already went through the whole thing with Harris at the time and said, this thing's going to be okay, right? I don't think there's anything in here that's Y2K sensitive. And they're like, nah. They even went and looked that there are a couple chips in their box and that it's fine. But I decided, yeah, what the heck, I'll put this thing on. And I patched in the old, I think I patched in the 9100 audio processor. Not, yeah, 9100 audio processor. Got it sound pretty good, and it was sounding pretty sweet. And I don't know, I let the newsroom know probably 10:30, quarter of 11 that we were doing that. And, you know, we rolled on through the new year. And it's sitting there. The one nice thing about that old transmitter being water cooled was it was very quiet and a completely different, you know, atmosphere sitting there in a quiet room with a little bit of hissing in the background of the water flowing and some chirping out of the modulation transformers. And, you know, it's just kind of sitting there happy. And I never thought much about it, and I'm sitting there again bored. And so I sit down and pen up an email, sent it to Al Kenyon, who was director or the SVP of J-Corps at the time, and sent him and Randy Michaels, who was the CEO, and Bill Setmeyer. I don't know how many people on here know Bill. I don't know. Bill may be on here for all I know. But Bill owned National Supervisory Network, sold his satellite company to, I think, Clear Channel later on, and or no, I guess maybe he sold it to J-Corps. Not sure of the timing on that. But anyhow, I sent it to Bill and those three, because I knew they would appreciate the humor. And I wrote up this little thing about how this transmitter had been on the air in World War II. It had been the keying of the transmitter by FDR and through the war and through Korea and through Vietnam, because the transmitter was on the air in alternate main service until 1975 or 6, when it was replaced by the Continental. So it had a pretty amazing history. There I am, and in my beard mode. My son's sporting the beard mode now. We had Christmas yesterday, and my wife stuffed his stocking with a razor. So anyhow, that's the story. And I never figured anything would happen. Bill Setmeyer took it upon himself to post my letter to, what was the group, Barry, that he posted it to? Was it
Broadcast?
Yeah, broadcast group. And man, it went kind of viral. It got wrote up in Radio World, and I got calls the next year. You're going to do that again? I said, not particularly. You know, unfortunately, the transmitter, while it's still there, has been, it is fully decommissioned. When I left and went to Denver as the regional VP, in 03, they made some, what I consider, mistakes in designing the building and the air HVAC, and allowed the system to freeze up and burst. And then once, so that pretty well put it out of commission. And then once Vertical Bridge took over, they wanted the PCBs gone. And there was some stuff in the building that was below the limit, but they just wanted it gone. So I was actually retained to clean that up last year and got rid of all the rest of the remaining uglies. The one plate transformer is still there, although it is now empty, even though the PCBs in the canister was only about 4 parts per million. The oil's gone. So that's the story of the Western Electric being on the air during the Y2K.
That's a great story. How long did you have it on the air?
Oh, I don't know, several hours. I put it on 10 o'clock-ish and probably took it off 1 o'clock-ish or something like that. And yeah, it ran like 3 hours and the thing just never failed to run. I know there had been times where we would run for days on it while we had the old Continental. Something would go wrong and I'm waiting on a part and it would run for days. I remember going over there one time in the middle of the night and got a call from a guy that did the overnights named Truckin' Bozo. Um, and Dale called me and said, the station's sounding funny and the readings are looking weird. And I walk into one of these huge, I'm sure anybody that's dealt with AM has saw the tall ceramic with a metal plate on each end, filled full of tar. Nowadays they're black epoxy or whatever, but back in the day they used to fill them full of tar. Well, in the transmitter WLW, they had ones like that were 8 inches in diameter and several, I don't know, 2 feet tall probably. And one of those was transmitter was still on the air, but there was a nice little tar fire going, and I hit it several times with the fire. It shut it down, of course, because you could actually walk into the back of the transmitter. Shut the transmitter down and went in there and hit the thing with CO2. And again, went back to the spare parts and got another spare part and put it in and got it back on the air. So, but it was pretty rugged old transmitter. It it modulated fairly well. It would do 110, 115% positive and didn't seem to mind that all that well or all that bad. So yeah.
Yeah, after 73 years, it sure was working well.
It was amazing the run that transmitter had. Like I said, it ran into the 70s and the stuff that I mean, it served as the driver for the 500,000 watt transmitter back in the day. And they maintained that 500,000 watt transmitter into the 60s. They were still trying to get superpower operation. And there was some design studies, and they were looking at modernizing the tube complement in the transmitter, and they were going to apply for a 625 kW license because that's what they felt that the transmitter would make it and still be able to be modulated to 100% with the transformer that was on the site. So, yeah.
I don't know how your time is this afternoon, but if you're willing and interested, perhaps after we talk with Jeff, we might take a little tour of the old WLW site. And
Absolutely. I'll stick around and yep, that transformer is still there. Looks a lot different in the background now, but
yeah,
yeah, it's still there. I'll stick around as long as I can.
great. Okay. Well, Paul, if you're still with us, I'd like to revert back to the wonderful. Well, what would you say? The uh, the old lady.
The Grand Lady is what Randy Michaels used to refer to the
Yeah.
WWS.
Yeah.
And he he had yeah, he had a memo up. He sent a memo out, and it was called WLW before he took it over. And when he became the program director, he said, "This grand old lady
Mm.
has a first name and a last name. His first name is 700. His last name is WLW. And whoever thinks they are presumptuous enough to use one and not the other will no longer work."
Very good. Very
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Well, this is the site that really stirs the hearts of radio lovers, I think.
Boy, it sure does. And I'll tell you, that's a bittersweet picture right there because that house is no longer there. I lived in that house for 13 years. Of course, the property and in this is your great example of corporate logic. Evidently, and I knew the house had asbestos in it because it had a heating plant that used to heat both buildings. And there was an underground tunnel of pipe. You couldn't walk through it. It went between the two buildings, and the boiler was in the basement of the residence. So they spent a crap ton of money removing all the asbestos out of the house and then demolished it.
Oh, oops.
So I'm like, really? You couldn't have found something to do with that, because that building on the right there, the house was the original. Well, I can't say original, but the transmitter for WSAI, which was on, I think 1330 originally, later went to 1360, was original in transmit or very early on transmit from that location before WLW was actually built at that site. So that house predated the building on the left. And the apartment upstairs is where the engineer lived, and it was eventually remodeled for the director of engineering back in the 70s, I think, or early 80s. And so, yeah.
It's great to be able to live 5 minutes from work.
Yeah, by walk. And not even that. And that was probably counting getting your shoes on and going downstairs. So yeah.
Unless you had to climb the tower.
Well, yeah, I only did that once. So
Now, Vertical Bridge owns the tower?
they own the tower, the building, the property. They've sold off some of the property. They have the property is being developed. There's actually and I don't know if I could come up with a view of what they call it, Radio Park or whatever it's called, but there is a car wash that is literally under the guy wires of the tower. And there's a road that runs next to the property. I was retained because I officially left iHeart in 2021. Or 22. No, I left in 22. But I still run my own company, Technical Media Services LLC, and I have not quite a few, but enough clients that I actually honestly make more money now than I did working for them. And I was retained to oversee the removal of the ground, the modification of the ground system, and the removal of the house and the disconnection of the house and the removal of the PCBs and all the stuff that had to be done, because they did a complete rework of the ground system, and we just needed to make sure that the integrity of the system was kept in place. And it appears for the most part that it has. I monitored the field strength from here at my location, and it's staying pretty steady.
Now, is that tower on top of the building a watchtower during the war?
Yeah, and that's actually just to the right of the building. There's like about a 25-foot or 30-foot wide pathway between the buildings, and there's steps that go downstairs, and there's on the house, and then there's steps that go downstairs, and there's a pit that you can have a crane to lift stuff in and out, and then that tower is literally right on the corner of the building, and that's the new layout of the property. And you can see the existing building kind of in the middle. It's gray. To the west, or to the that's the building, and kind of where the pointer is almost is if you bring the pointer over almost to the back corner of the rectangular building, that's where the tower is. Yeah, it's to the back of the other building. And yeah, that one there. You see the pathway in between. But that's there. It originally during World War II, there was a perimeter fence and it had motion detectors and there was a spotlight and they had armed guards and they monitored the tower. The site, I've actually found some blueprints of underground cables coming into the site for the telephone company.
So they put a
Yeah.
pond where your house was.
The pond was actually supposed to be in front of it. You see the house there. The house is actually still in that drawing, and it was originally intended for that house to remain, and for whatever reason, they chose to remove it.
Hmm.
But so there's a fence around that compound right there. And that's how it is now. There's actually a huge pond just to the west of the towers. The big tower over. Yeah, and some of those that isn't exactly as built. So there's a huge couple of fair-sized ponds over in that area, and all that ground system was hacked up, and the ground system or yeah, that's that they were cutting up the tree at that point. There was a big tree there, huge old beautiful pine tree, and I guess that's when they were shredding it and probably getting ready to demolish the house at that point, because I think that's the machine that did it. I wasn't there at the time. Came by one day and it was just gone.
Hmm.
So,
Now, how does all that development affect the signal?
well, there had been some pretty strong arguments, both for and against, and of course, Vertical Bridge retained Hatfield and Dawson, and they did a study and said that the impact would be minimal. And John Warner, who is unfortunately no longer with us, had done a bunch of field strength measurements before, and then he was somewhat ignominiously dismissed from iHeart, and so all those readings kind of went to the grave with it. There's a picture of the property with the ponds as built. Going back to the performance, I have monitored the field strength just and I have a calibrated concrete pillar out in the front of my house. I've got a stone pillar that's 4 feet tall, 5 feet tall. And that's where I park my field strength meter and do reference readings. And it's pretty good. I want to wait till next spring and measure it and see how it does. I mean, honestly, it's no skin off my nose at this point. But yeah, so what they did was they put in all new ground radials. Kevin WD4RAT, it's called sign. Kevin Kidd, is that right? Does ground systems. And I think Kevin oversaw most of the ground system work for that. But you can see the fence around the property, and the building out back is for the FM. The transmission lines were buried underground out to the site. You can see down in the bottom by the big tower, a white line. That is the last of the transmission line. I have the piece in my shop outside here that has the 10-inch transmission line that the day I found out they were getting ready to pull it up, my wife and I were sitting down and having dinner, and I said, "You want to go for a ride?" And she's like, "Yeah, sure." So we drove from Wilmington, Ohio, which, by the way, I found the dog and cat reference kind of humorous because I'm not far from Springfield, Ohio. Anyhow, we drove down and I sawed out the section of 10.5 inch line that had my name on it that I had written on the line in 1995. So I have that piece of line, and then there's another piece, which you can see there's a piece missing down by the tower that has now been reconditioned and is at the Voice of America on display. Really nice display. So if you ever get a chance to go to the VOA museum, I would suggest doing it. But yeah, that's kind of what they want to turn it into. I think with the ramp up in the cost of money, it's not gone quite as well as they would have hoped. The only thing that's really happened is there's been the car wash built literally right down by the bridge, or down by the under the guy wires of the tower, very close to the tower. I know the field's got to be brutal there, probably 20 volts per meter or more, and I assume that whoever that they contracted with to build the site did the proper screening and bypassing and everything that they had to be done, because I've been involved in fixing another problem at a 50 kilowatt AM, and some of the houses there are literally built off the end of the radius 200 feet from the tower, and that's crazy. Oh, I saw my iModulate sign. There was a group in Cincinnati called the Modulators, and they had that sticker that said iModulate, and I thought that would be really great to hang above the mod when we used to run Randy modulation. And anybody that doesn't know what I'm referring to was if we weren't hitting 135, we weren't modulating.
Indeed.
I think Grady left, but I think he's aware of that. I think he used to work at that built that, I think.
Well, we have an awful lot of history there. I don't know if you want to talk about any of it or just
Well, that's the Western Electric transmitter early on.
the first one.
And well, that's the only Western Electric that was there. There was a lot of different things there, and that's back in the day. That desk is no longer there. I'm told that it might be at the Voice of America Museum, or maybe it's gone to time. But that, I believe, was the control desk. I don't know if that was the control desk for the Western or for the 500. There's the desk that's there now, and that's the one I was always familiar with working with, and that's an interesting.
Looks like you were really modulating.
Oh yeah, I think it's a 15 amp meter, and base current was 14 something, and you'll notice that speaker up on the right hand side. That's a unique speaker. It's actually styrofoam, and I forget the brand of it, but it's not necessarily a great sounding speaker. But they actually the styrofoam has been modified such that there's a groove around it, and it's an odd shape, and they actually drive the styrofoam material as a speaker. And I just put it up there because I thought it was kind of cool. It really sucked as a speaker.
Did the cathode ever? You didn't ever try to bring that one back.
No, I actually did. The cathinode was a plate module. Well, the cathinode when I got there had been converted to a plate modulated rig. The reason for that was the Continental transmitter was put in the mid 70s, 1975, I do believe. And the FCC had the rule of maintaining maintaining tube inventory. You had to keep spares. Well, that transmitter used the Parafor CX 35,000s. So, and then the transmitter, the FM transmitter that used to be in the building, which was his reference to the Harris bang box made me chuckle, because we had an FM 20 K or H that if you tuned it improperly would go bang, and it used the 4CX 15,000. Well, we actually used and I forget the Y number of the tube, but it's a high voltage version of the 4CX 15,000. It has a silicone ring around the base of it and would handle up to 12,000 volts. This transmitter was modified to run a 4CX 35,000 in the final.
Oh, welcome back.
To produce 50 kilowatts, and the modulators were the high voltage versions of the 4CX 15,000s, which, by the way, was the electrical equivalent in the modulator section to the Western Electric to the left of. And they had never completed the conversion. The transmitter had an instability and would go off, and as Harold had said earlier, oscillators, amplifiers will oscillate. And that transmitter had a tendency to do that. And I went through and made a bunch of modifications and got the transmitter stabilized and settled down to where it wouldn't oscillate. And it was, believe it or not, actually the modulators were oscillating in the RF range at around 7 megahertz. And let me tell you, that produced quite the light show in the room there. Those lights right above and the fluorescence would turn purple when that modulator would start oscillating. Anyhow, long story short, I did get it to operating. I could get 125% positive peak modulation out of it. And it ran pretty good until we had a fault take out the modulation principle. So
Now, was the Western Electric the one you put on the air?
yes, the one to the left here is those first 4 cabinets, and then the exciter that I was talking about that needed the 807 tube is on the far left. You'll see the freak counter down at the bottom. And then there's 2 oscillators, one for transmitter 1 and one for transmitter 2. And you could switch those back and forth because they had everything built redundant. So the oscillators would work for either transmitter. Now, an interesting tidbit, one of those oscillators got to be something burned up, a transformer or something. So it was pretty much unreliable. And so we needed something to drive the transmitter with. And I looked at buying a Continental oscillator card or something like that. And I ended up actually buying an LPB 30 watt or 25 watt transmitter, turning the modulation down, shorting the audio input, and using the LPB transmitter as the oscillator to drive the transmitter in the last 3 cabinets, and it operated that way. Matter of fact, that exciter is still hanging in the back of the rack of that transmitter. So So that's the deal on that. And there's the rack of equipment. Looks like wow, is that a Grady Labs? I believe it is. And Adapt and Optimod 9100 and
Modulation.
oh yeah, and if you look real close at that meter, you'll see it's kind of bouncing off the pin there. And oh yeah, look at that. And of course there's the infamous FEMA PEP index. Notice it has the special sticker on it. And looks like CRL gear, yeah. Audio patch bay. And,
Hey, you have about 5 different audio processors there.
well, yeah, you know, if two's good, five's better, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can never have enough backup. Mhm.
This is the remote control.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's an
Oh.
old DRS1, isn't it?
Yeah, dear, it might be DRS. I'm trying to remember.
That was the first.
MRS or DRS. And I think at that point it was being used as probably as a place as because the remote control was never in that rack. So it was probably being used to hold something else up. So,
Yeah, that was the first remote control I had to take care of at a fairly major station, and it was the most easy to understand remote control that I ever had to work with, because you basically had those BCD code switch on the far side that would dial up the 16 channels. But then the two yellow buttons there were the raise and lower button. But something that I never saw in any other remote control and really helped me out was when you would press the raise button, it would not light up until the other end was actually pulled in the raise relay. So, you know, it's not just I pressed the button, it's I saw the light come on, I knew the other end heard me and did what I told it to do.
Right. Well, you know, the very first remote control when I got in the business that I ever had the misfortune to work on was the PBR 30 with the stepper relay.
Yeah.
And
I got to work on both the PBR 30 and also DRS1.
yeah,
At an AM site, the PBR 30 had 120 volt control lines going to that stepper. So that was fun.
yeah.
DRS1 I worked on was had been struck by lightning, so I got to learn that one real well. And then I actually got to emulate the audio for that in the PCC 180 that emulated different control points.
Yeah, I remember going to the first station I took over, the PBR 30 was non-functional, and it had RTL logic chips in it. And I remember calling Mosley and saying, "Hey, I need some of these chips." And they go, "Well, they're just not made anymore."
Actually, that remote unit looks awfully familiar. I think we had it at WOR.
Yeah, probably so. But so fortunately, the guy went back and he said, "You know what?" He said, "Let me go back and dig through my drawer." And he found some chips on a board, and pulled them off and sent them to me in charge. So
I've got a couple of PBR 30s here.
that's okay. I'll pass. And then the picture that Barry's put up is the harmonic filter. And you know, it's your typical series trap. You know, to suck off the third harmonic. Up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the exit point to the 10-inch RF line. And the handle down on the right is the switch between 50 and 500. When you push the switch one way, and I can't read, that's the antenna, switch in 50, out is 500. But what really is humorous is the little black switch next to it, which is nothing more than a light switch. That was your transmitter. So when you were switching from 500 to 50 to make sure everything was properly muted, you flip the switch off with a standard light switch. Flip the switch and then flipped it back on, and that let everybody know, okay, let's bring it back up in whatever mode it's supposed to. I always, every time I see that switch, I laugh at it. And there's like Barry
Yeah.
in front of the transmitter. Back in the corner there's now two couple hundred kW generators courtesy of FEMA. And then outside there's some pods that have a 10 kilowatt transmitter and another generator, and it's all in the doomsday bunker. And that red thing to the right is a CO2 fire extinguisher. Yeah.
I was just going to ask if WLW was a PEP station. You've answered that, so
Yeah.
I didn't see anything in any of the outside pictures of the buildings that FEMA put in.
That's an older picture.
Oh, before
older
then.
picture. Yeah,
Okay.
there are pictures somewhere, I'm sure, of those.
Did you guys have things set up with FEMA prior to the PEP program?
Well, the PEP program came to being, gee whiz, in the late 80s, probably.
Could have been,
Yeah,
but I think, yeah, because I worked at a station out here in Nebraska, and we had, FEMA had supplied us with a generator and additional equipment that we could actually put the station to air in an emergency situation. But
Yeah,
then
well,
later they came up with the outside buildings. They had to have their own little transmitter and all that sort of thing, which.
Right, yeah. They originally tried to harden the buildings to, I think it's 2 pounds per square inch over blast zone, and then there's the PEP or the EMP hardening, and there's the transmitter probably taken before Barry was born. And you'll notice the motor generators in the background were originally there to drive the filaments of the tubes, and you can see what's like a bus structure overhead that ran the DC to the tubes, and you can see the cooling water going up. And that was later, the filaments were later converted to AC, and there was a bridge built along the front that got the transformers up very close to the ceiling, and they actually ran AC on the filaments of the tubes later on. And we had to remove those to get the one transformer out, because that back transformer tested high because they pulled the sample off the bottom. And here's something that we learned after the fact. We paid a lot of money to have that transformer removed, and they pulled the sample off, and it was above the safe threshold, or you're allowed to leave it there threshold. And so we paid to get rid of it. So they came in, pumped the oil out into 55-gallon barrels. Then they lowered a forklift down in the basement, pulled that transformer out, and shipped it to Cleveland disposal in the Cuyahoga. No, I'm just kidding. But they when they sent us the report back, they said that oil tested under the limit. Said it was very, very, and we've had some discussions, and I talked with chemists about this. And I said, they said, I said, how do you explain that? And they couldn't. I said, well, my theory is diesel fuel will stratify. And PCB has a heavier specific gravity than mineral oil. And I think, honestly, what happened was the PCB materials, because these transformers weren't originally built with PCBs in them. There was equipment brought in later, and then they had a maintenance program where they filtered the oil. And we figure that the transformers got contaminated with the filter. So we feel that probably what happened was those transformers had set so long, the oil had settled. And once they stirred the oil back up, it became clear again. There is the WSAI antenna, and that was a flat top, and the wire went in. There used to be a square opening in the back of the house where the wire antenna fed in, and the front room, which was the dining room of the house, and at one time was the control point of the house, was completely wrapped in copper sheathing. Not sheathing, but copper. It was chicken wire, or whatever you want to call it, 1/2-inch grid. And it was interesting because the field was about 8 volts per meter. And when you walked in that room, you became noticeably calm because it was well shielded. So that's the base insulator for the big tower. There are 29 poles driven into the ground, oak poles driven into the ground, and the concrete piers built on top of them. Sometimes makes you wonder how supposedly how that oak is holding up. And again, that's SEP, somebody else's problem.
Question on the motor generators for the filament.
Uh-huh.
They were running DC, I assume, to not get hum, but output of a DC generator is not very clean.
Yeah,
Did they filter it,
that,
or
that's what, of course, they were long gone by the time I got there, but I was told that was done, I assume, for noise, or I think the theory at the time was you ran your filaments off of DC, and I can't say, but obviously it became not that much of an issue later on. I think they realized that that's probably a bit over the top, and then maintenance issues and concerns of running motor generator, which I'm sure had brushes and all the other stuff in it. They decided, and they may have come, because I think those tubes that are in there were a retrofit. There's the plow. Oh, look, it's a Farmall. The plow's putting in the radials. By the way, there were only 56 radials under that tower. I can tell you there's more there now, since this was redone. And I'm looking at the picture in the background. It looks like a substation. It does not look like the substation that was put in to run the 500 kW.
So did they put in the fewer radials because back then they didn't think they needed as many, and nowadays they want way
They
more?
they did a study, and you can see the radios plowed in there.
Yeah,
on
I
the
see 'em.
left-hand side.
Yeah.
They did a study, and they plowed in radios and made measurements. And I don't know if they did it, where they did it, but they ran, there's a whole study of things. And that was the other thing about working at this site, was it was an absolute treasure trove of technical information that had been discovered empirically. So they determined that the radials, 56 were good enough. If they'd have went to 120, you'd have seen an improvement of 400 watts in radiated power. And so you stop and think about that. That's half of what the FCC typically wants to see. They want to see 120 feet or 120 radials at, you know,
Which was from Dr. Brown, who oddly enough at WSUN only had 117 because they ran out of copper.
Well, and I'm also told that the FCC chose the number of 120 because even if they screw up half of them, they've still got 60, which is enough. Now, that sounds like
Interesting.
Sounds good.
One other question that's kind of sitting in the back of my mind here is, how did this station interact with the Bethany VOA station up the road? Was
well,
there any issues with interaction between the two?
well, this station was here first, obviously,
Yeah.
and they engineering staff from both sites maintained both sites.
Mhm.
And they were all originally Crosley engineers. And one thing I do want to cover while I'm thinking of it, the road, you notice, is going right through the middle of the radio. And this was something that I wasn't necessarily tickled about, but they ran 4-inch strap down each side of the road, and they cut across every 50 feet. To get from one side of the road to the other. And I don't know if that's proper or not. I mean, you are getting return current flow, but to me, that just seems
On the
skimpy.
number of radials on my amateur radio antenna, which is a 30-foot vertical, I ran impedance sweeps after putting down each pair of radials. And it was interesting to see how it changed or didn't change as the number got up.
Right, yeah. Now,
Some years ago in Clifton, Arizona, they had a major flood, and the Army Corps of Engineers came in, and they, as you can see from this picture, they managed to destroy half the ground system of the radio station, literally. And I was tasked, I mean, this is 40 odd years ago. I was tasked to go out and measure the station, and with half the radials, the difference was immeasurable.
what frequency?
1230,
Okay.
1490, 1490.
So how much of the radio field do you think they destroyed?
About half.
Oh, wow, okay. Well, I know,
This berm is what separated it.
I know I was involved in a station in Idaho, KID AM. Is that right? 5 something. And they had been in a potato field, and the farmer had converted the potato field from just a field to flood irrigation. So he had to level the field. And I was speaking with him. He's an old fellow. And I said, and this had been done for years ago. And I asked him, I said, so when you graded this whole place flat, what happened to the did you dig up anything? Oh yeah, we had all kind of wires everywhere. And so we ended up modifying a plow that could go 2 feet deep. And I know you're not supposed to put radials in that, but we plowed these radial. We put all the new transmission. We rebuilt the array, put new transmission lines in. You know, 4 feet deep, and plowed in the new radials 2 feet deep to get well below any possible damage from flood irrigation. And
That's happened a lot. That's happened a lot. We had a station here on 1450 that owner was too cheap. He hired a landscaping firm. They went in, graded it, and pulled the whole ground system out.
yeah, well, so we had the state KID in Idaho Falls, and then over in Boise was a station on. I think seems like one was on 560 and one was on 570, or I don't, you know, they were 10 kilohertz apart. And I know when I drove across the state when I first took over up there, I could barely hear KID out of town almost. I mean, it was bad. And when we got done, as expected, the two stations met each other about halfway between the two different cities. So that one did make a difference, because I don't think they had any ground system at all. So,
and now there's also a move to elevated radials. You can get by with 3 or 4. And I'm always wondering how high they have to be elevated to allow you to use such a small number.
Yeah, I don't know. I know Bill Brown did an AM with elevated radials here in Xenia, Ohio. And I really haven't followed how that's worked or how many radials or I even know that guy calls me when he has trouble, but I've honestly never been to the site. He's usually the owner's pretty good at fixing it himself. So
Now, is this photo of the Western Electric or the 500?
that's the 500, which was an RCA technically, although RCA or Westinghouse and GE both had parts in it. And that's the 500. So that is the control console. And if you walk in the building today, where those posts are is a wall. There's concrete block wall, and where he's sitting is about where the HVAC equipment is, behind the wall. So yeah, much different. And you can see the guy standing up on the console, and that's the output tube. They're standing next to, which there's still one there. Yeah, that one.
These walk-in transmitters are interesting. I worked on a RCA TV transmitter that had a door at the end and you could walk in.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had one in Boston.
One of the coolest transmitters I think I ever saw was in a KID TV in Idaho Falls up on East Butte. And it wasn't big, it wasn't anything special, but it was an old RCA, and it was completely surrounded, or it looked like a blender. It was round and it had multiple tubes in it and a bunch of meters. But it
Was
looked
that a TV transmitter?
yes, TV rig, yeah.
Yeah, that's what this station had also. That round was their final amplifier.
Yeah, and it had multiple tubes in it, and it was just crazy. I was so fascinated with that. You know, it's kind of one of those. Gee, I wish I could take that home with me. Hopefully,
I think I saw one of those rigs at the Empire State Building, and they called that amplifier the bean pot.
the bean pod.
Because for some reason somebody thought it looked like something you would cook beans in.
There also were Cray supercomputers, the same shape when they had seating around the side.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a good. Yeah, that's a very good description. Yeah. It's surrounded by meters. Yeah. Yeah. It's Somebody asked me a question, I kind of got off track. And I don't know if I properly answered it, but if you did and I didn't answer it, ask it again because I've forgotten it.
So Vertical Bridge owns the entire property, but iHeart still operates it.
Yes, iHeart transmits their 96.5 Cumulus transmits from there. EMF, I believe, has a translator there. And
Oh, so WLW has a translator.
no, EMF's translator is somebody else. WLW has a translator on 94.5 in downtown Cincinnati on channel 12's tower. It's a pretty potent translator, but yes, they do have a translator.
Well, you got stations in my market where they're dumping the power of the AM just to be able to have a translator. I wonder if WLW might go that way.
Don't not there would be no benefit for them, I don't think, to do that because you know, if anything, WLW, honestly, they ought to do like WSB and get a couple of full power FMs. You know, once they damage the business enough to where the radio stations become cheap again, they do that. Did I say that out loud? I'm sorry.
Well,
Well,
everybody's selling off everything and going FM.
Well, I'm running an FM here in town where I live in Wilmington, Ohio. I'm the general chairman of WIOH, Wilmington, Ohio, LP. Belongs to the Clinton County Amateur Radio Association. And when the window came open, I approached the club and said, "Hey, I'm the technical chairman." And I said, "Hey guys," I said, "would you guys be interested in this?" I said, "If so, I've probably got enough crap in my garage to build a radio station." And they're like, and I honestly, I didn't know how much hands would take it. And they were like, "Heck yeah." They were really excited. And so we put the antenna on the local water tank along with our repeaters and the studio's out here in my Florida room. I got a Four Seasons room out here, and people can come and go as they need to, and you know, we're having fun with it, and it's not costing much. So yeah, that's my latest nonsense. And that, let's see. Oh, that's probably the signal null to protect Leamington. That was the directional one.
Mm-hmm.
And
They had to null towards Canada, didn't they?
Leamington, Ontario, 710. The rumor has it that what's the dashed circle? Is there any legend on there saying what that is? I think
That's the 500 all by itself on non-D, 1 millivolt.
yeah, and then the 50 is the inner circle. That's 5 millivolts per meter. So basically, and the story was, as it was told, was that the people in Leamington were complaining that when WLW went to 500 kilowatts at night, it just literally wiped them off the dial. You couldn't hear anything but WLW. So they made them go directional and point that signal to the south. And if you look at that, that's 5 millivolts over what?
Well, there
down in-
wasn't as much RFI in those days to begin with.
No,
No Cuban interference either.
no Cuba, and probably not a whole heck of a lot going on in Mexico and down in that direction. I mean, AM was it, and obviously, you know, they're putting 5 mils into Cuba, the tip of Cuba, and I mean, that's a brutal signal.
I know WOR objected. We were at 710,
Yeah.
and for some reason, we just dropped the objection.
Yeah, probably they said, well, you know, you keep objecting to this, you won't be able to get 500 kW. And they thought, oh, yeah, I would imagine that would be the objection. I'll tell you, a funny little story about WOR. And
There are
that,
lots of them.
yeah, well, when we were doing the IBOC tests, we did a lot of initial tests with whatever the name of the company was back in the day. And we set up, you know, exciters at WLW and at WOR, and we had a timer set up so that we would transmit 10 minutes HD. Every minute we would switch the HD carrier on and off. And then we would swap that, and we cut the audio to 5 kilohertz, and we sat there, and when WLW was running 5 kilohertz audio with no HD carriers, my bedroom in this picture here was in the left-hand corner of the house. Where that peaked roof was my bathroom. So if you come 10 or 15 feet back towards the tower was where my bedroom was. And I sat there one night with a Radio Shack DX 398 or whatever it was. And I listened to WOR in New York City. That close to WLW. Now, it wasn't perfectly clean and armchair copy, as they say, but it was pretty good. I was impressed.
Well, we had a problem. I'm right in the middle. We had WINS at 1010, KDKA at 1020, and let's see who else, NWBZ at 1030. And when all of them were running IBOC, or more properly iBuzz,
Yeah.
KDKA was just wiped out.
Oh, the AM band was designed horribly. And I by the way, the picture here on, I saw some pictures of a fountain, cooling fountain in operation. It's SAQ, it's a 200 kilowatt Morse code station on 17 kilohertz in Sweden. They operated on Christmas Eve, I think, and they still have their water cooling ponds. And there's Powell Crosley doing the berry.
Isn't SAQ using a alternator to generate the RF?
Yes, using an alternator. Yeah,
It's just amazing.
I think that if we ever got to the point of where we could reorder the AM band or the medium wave band, I would be a fan of digital. And I know that's heresy, but not hybrid digital, but you know, kind of like what's the other the shortwave digital
DRM.
DRM, which DRM would never fly here, but you know, go to full digital systems and then set the band up so that you keep out, you put guard bands. You design the band like you would if you had any common sense, not like the way it's been built. And I think you could make a very viable AM service that sounded pretty darn good. But trouble is, you're going to have to throw the baby out with the bathwater for a while, and people that's got radio stations like WLW and everything sit still for it.
Well, I remember living in Boston. I could receive WQXR at 1560, and apparently they were running almost 20 kilohertz audio, and it was amazing.
Oh, we ran 1530 in Cincinnati, and did pretty decent audio with it. I had a Carver tuner, and it sounds pretty phenomenal. But the problem is my Carver is probably 0.1% of anybody listening to AM, and that's I actually was sitting in Quincy, Illinois, and Jeff Littlejohn and myself and Gary Klein, and I'm sure there were some others were sitting around after having done some kind of an HD training thing at Quincy there at Harris. And we were sitting around in a restaurant, and I was relaying the fact that I could receive WOR 800 feet from WLW. And the outcome of that meeting was when we came out and much to many engineers' chagrin, came out with the 5 kilohertz audio mandate. Gary Klein did, and so did Jeff Littlejohn. I think I set mine to 6, but a lot of people bemoan the fact that was done, but that narrowing of the bandwidth on AM was done not by us. It was done by Detroit long before we ever did it. And, that's just the bottom line.
Right. Yeah, they of course were getting complaints about interference on the radio, so they would narrow them.
Right.
And but now with radios being DSP based, single chip, it really seems like we could have some great radios, and it's all just a matter of software. It's not choosing filters or any of this stuff. It's all software.
Oh, it is. It is. And I'll tell you, Randy Michaels is a friend of mine, and he showed me this SDR little portable radio that is phenomenal. It's got a phenomenal FM receiver in it. It's got a phenomenal AM receiver in it. And that man is still just as ate up as he's ever been about radio. And I'll tell you, yeah. What is that? What model is that?
This is a Texan, which is based on the Silicon Labs chip.
Okay. Yeah, that's an SDR. Yeah.
It's antenna goes to one side of the chip and audio comes out the other.
Well, guys, I need to run. My wife is I've got a ham radio club meeting I've got to go to tonight, and I promised my wife I would take her out to dinner.
Paul, I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time.
Well, it was fun. I enjoyed it. Kind of fun seeing some of the old pictures and reminiscing. And
It's been too long since we've spoken and corresponded, but I've always appreciated your kindness and not only that, but your attention to the history of the industry and willingness to share.
Yeah, it's fun. I enjoy it, and
Yeah, thank you. It's been fascinating.
well, I appreciate it, and you guys have a happy new year, and we'll, as they say in the ham radio circles, we'll see you later on down the electric.
You take care. Hope to see you again soon.
All righty, bye, guys.